Hello, friends, and welcome back to Stories About Entitled People. Let's start today's video with a story about an anime convention, a street preacher with a megaphone, and one safety consultant who figured out the perfect way to turn hate into one giant dance party. But before we begin, best way to support our channel is to leave comments, like, and subscribe with a turned-on bell so you don't miss the new video every single day. Here we go. Hateful street preacher met 400 dancing weebs and a sound system from hell. One of the fun parts of doing public safety consulting is the wide variety of clients and experiences. One of my favorites was an anime convention. Although it isn't my thing, the event was always a ton of fun and the people were awesome. One year they changed venues. It had been previously held at a university, but it outgrew that space and moved to a downtown convention center with tons of space and a huge pedestrian street between the two main buildings. It was a great space. Being in charge of public safety and emergency management, I knew this came with new challenges, primarily being very visible with far more public interaction than ever before. As much as my emergency plans were very, very comprehensive, I soon discovered something I'd overlooked. A street preacher. This is a preacher that was well known in the city and walked a very thin line between free speech and hate speech. He also came with an amplifier. He'd been doing this for a long time, so he was always just on the edge of what the law allows. He parked himself between the two buildings and started harassing attendees. Not enough to meet the legal definition of harassment, but definitely unpleasant and not something patrons should be subjected to. I discussed the situation with the police liaison officer, and as I suspected, they couldn't do anything besides ask him to leave, which they did, and he didn't. As we were working to figure out a solution, he jokingly said, "Well, you have a sound permit, maybe just get bigger speakers." Light bulb, we had bigger speakers. Much, much bigger speakers. I put a call out over the radio to my emergency management team, and we mobilized. Before he could say, "Repent," we'd set up an impromptu DJ booth in the entrance, big speakers outside, and taped down all the cables because safety. Sandstorm had always been a bit of a meme for the con staff, so he was rude, but we were the ruder. About 400 patrons started dancing, laughing, and having a great time. The street preacher soon found himself surrounded by all these people he hates, and they were having the time of their lives. Nobody could hear him over the music and the cheers. He was absolutely livid. About half an hour later, I got a call from the police liaison officer. He made a complaint about amplified harassment. They told him to pound sand. We had permits and were totally legal, and if he didn't like it, he could leave. I've done a lot of things in my 20-year career in emergency services, but drowning out hate with happiness is one of the things I'm most proud of. The preacher kept his microphone, the crowd kept their dignity, and you orchestrated it so smoothly it could have been choreographed. That's not just event ops, it's public space aikido. Subtle, clean, effective. And our second story. I got fired for breaking 2 fingers. I worked at this after-school care place. It was always held at the back of the elementary schools in my area, and I would change sites pretty regularly. A lot of high schools worked there, including me at the time, and I quite frankly loved the job. Although I did absolutely love my job, I hated my manager. He was a higher-up within the company that would stop by and oversee to make sure everything was going smoothly. He was more important than a manager, but that's not what I'm going to refer to him as from now on. He was horrible at his job, and everyone I worked with agreed. For example, there were plenty of times someone should have been fired and he was just too chicken to do it, like a coworker who'd shown up drunk to work, one that harassed me and multiple other women we worked with who was reported by multiple of us, and one that would literally disappear for hours during her work hours. The real problem, however, came very shortly before he fired me. Didn't know he knew how to do that, because I missed my shift. I just left school, and as I was getting into the car, I accidentally closed the door on my fingers, like the middle of my fingers. And it was so hard, I broke 2 of them and had to rush to the hospital. On the way, I shot him a quick text that my friend sent, who drove me because I was crying too hard to call him. Now, in the contract I signed when I got the job, a no-call, no-show resulted in being fired, unless it was a medical emergency. So after I came back to work with one of those splints on 2 of my broken fingers, he came to the site I was at with a write-up that I had to sign. I asked him why, because I told him before my shift had even started He looked at me and said, "I called you saying you still had to come in and you didn't answer." But I had no service in the ER, so I never got it. I told him there's no way he expected me to come in with 2 broken fingers, and he told me it wasn't his problem, so he fired me, but told me I was still expected to show up to my final 2 shifts of the week, which he had done 20 minutes before the first shift, and I was so in shock I went. On my second, a different higher-up stopped by that I'd never met just to check in. She came over and introduced herself, holding out her hand. When I told her my name, she retracted her hand and walked away without another word. After my shift, a coworker called me and let me know that my manager had called every single coworker of mine and told them if I showed up again to call the police because I wasn't supposed to be there for my last 2 shifts. I was in shock. He told me to go to them. There was even an HR person sitting in on our meeting that could confirm this, so I went to HR. I had a meeting with the head of the department and the woman who was there when I got fired. I told them about the coworker who'd harassed me, the write-up that didn't make sense, and the HR person confirmed he had told me to show up for my shifts. And you're probably wondering where I got my revenge. He got fired because of me. They went to other coworkers who confirmed my story, and they fired him. I learned this a few months after the whole debacle when talking to a friend of mine. Her mom works in the school district and confirmed to me that he'd been fired because of me. To this day, whenever I remember it, I smile. Do I feel sort of bad? Yes. But when I tell you my story doesn't even include the half of what this manager did and didn't do, you'd understand why I feel so happy. Although this may not be deemed as petty, I think it is because I had an attitude of if I'm going down, he's coming down with me. And that's the only reason I went to HR. Never feel bad when he was the one who did the work to get fired. You didn't. Drop the bad feelings. Drop them. Nope, not going to let you feel bad about it. I still see some guilt creeping up. Nope. There, that's it. Do not feel guilty for a true fireable offense. And our next story. My neighbor thinks my driveway is his free parking spot. I live in a townhouse with a small driveway, just big enough for my car. Meanwhile, my next-door neighbor doesn't have a driveway and has to rely on street parking. Normally, this wouldn't be my problem, except my neighbor has apparently decided that my driveway should be his backup parking spot whenever he feels like it. At first, it was just the occasional emergency situation. A couple of times he had guests over and asked if he could use my driveway just for the night. I figured it was a one-time thing, so I didn't make a fuss, but then it started happening every week. At first, I'd come home to find his car sitting in my driveway, and he'd act totally casual about it. "Oh, hey, I just parked here for a bit. I knew you wouldn't mind." No apology, no asking first, just pure entitlement. One morning, I was already late for work when I walked outside and saw that my neighbor's car was completely blocking my driveway. I was fuming. I knocked on his door 5 times before he finally answered, half dressed and half asleep. Me, "You're blocking me in. I need to leave." Him, "Oh, yeah, just give me a sec." Then he actually closes the door on me. I waited 5 more minutes before I started laying on my horn. That finally got him moving. But when he came outside, instead of apologizing, he had the nerve to tell me, "You're being really unneighborly about this. It's just a driveway. You're being selfish." WTF, dude, it's my driveway. You don't get to just take it whenever you want. But this guy was so entitled that he just shrugged, muttered something about how real neighbors help each other, and then slowly moved his car like he wasn't the one making me late for work. Fine. You want to fight? You got one. I decided right then and there that I was done playing nice. Next time he pulled this stunt, I'd let a tow truck handle it. Sure enough, a few days later, I came home late and, surprise, surprise, his car was parked in my driveway. No note, no text, nothing. So I did exactly what I said I would. I called a tow truck, grabbed some popcorn, and sat on my porch to watch as they hauled his car away. About an hour later, he showed up furious. Him, "Did you call a tow truck on me?" Me, "Sure did." That's when he started raging about how I was going to pay for this because his father was a lawyer. That's when I smiled and said, "Oh, that's funny, so's mine." The look on his face was priceless. I could actually see the gears turning in his head as he realized that this wasn't going to go away. He stammered, threw out some more weak threats, then stormed back into his house. The best part? He had to pay over $300 to get his car out of impound. And ever since that night, he hasn't parked in my driveway again. Guess he finally learned what unneighborly really looks like? What does he want next? Keys to your townhouse so he can come in and use your toilet or wash his clothes? It's called personal property, and your driveway's no different. Bet his attitude would change if the situation were reversed. And our last story. Karen thought her master key gave her a crown. Turns out it just unlocked a police report. Last month while I was at work, one of my smoke detectors started that low battery chirp. You know the one, not a full-blown alarm, just that annoying little beep every few seconds. My next-door neighbor texted me about it, and I figured I'd deal with it when I got home. But when I walked in around 6 p.m., the beeping had stopped, and one of my smoke detectors was just gone. Not silenced, not unplugged, missing. That's when I realized Karen had struck again. Karen's my downstairs neighbor. She's also the self-declared queen of the HOA board and seems to think she owns every square inch of this building. She has a master key to every unit for emergencies, and she uses that as an excuse to snoop and micromanage. Earlier that day, I'd actually gotten a call from my property manager saying, "Oh, by the way, Karen is planning to enter your unit because of a smoke detector issue." I told him flat out, "No, do not give anyone permission to enter. I'll take care of it when I get home." Fast forward to that evening, no beep, but also no smoke detector. I emailed the property manager, who casually replied, "Yes, Karen entered your unit and disposed of the detector." Disposed? Like it was a broken spatula and not a safety device I paid for? I asked for Karen's contact info so I could talk to her directly, and suddenly the property manager disappeared. No reply, no return calls, nothing. So I reached out to the fire department. Their response? It's common to remove failed detectors, assuming it'll be replaced the next working day. We don't get involved in condo disputes. That didn't sit right with me. I'm the owner. I never gave anyone permission. Karen walked into my home and took something, and no one seemed to care. So I filed a police report, explained that someone had entered my property without consent and removed a device I owned. They logged it as unlawful entry and theft. I brought that report to the next HOA board meeting. Picture the scene. Everyone's seated around a long table, and Karen perched at the end like she's holding court. I stood up, held up the police report, and said, "Since you admit to entering my unit without permission and removing my smoke detector, I've reported it as a crime. I expect charges to be filed." Karen's face turned bright red. "I was just trying to keep the building safe," she said, raising her voice. "No, Karen," I replied. "If you cared about safety, you would have called me or waited a few hours. You entered my home and took something without permission." Another board member chimed in with, "Well, technically she had a key." I cut him off. A key doesn't make it legal. Nothing in the HOA rules, nothing in her role as board member gives her the right to enter someone's home and take their property. That's unlawful entry. End of story. Silence. Karen started fumbling for words, mumbling about a miscommunication and standard procedure. I placed the receipt for the new smoke detector I'd already installed on the table and said, "Problem solved. And from now on, if anyone tries to enter my unit without my say-so, they can explain it to the police again." She had nothing to say after that, just sat there. As I was leaving, one of the quieter residents leaned over and whispered, "About time someone stood up to her." I've since had a new deadbolt installed, one that isn't part of the building's master key set. My smoke detectors are in place and untouched, and Karen, she's been avoiding eye contact and hasn't said a word to me since. Because even self-appointed condo royalty needs a reminder, trespassing isn't part of the job description. The Property Manager's Vanishing Act says plenty too. Folks love authority until it comes with accountability. Watching Karen turn scarlet when you said unlawful entry was the natural consequence. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.